What all of us are concerned about is he's a very good liar.
The horrors they endured are unimaginable, and only they can really ever know what went on in that house.
One victim let me back in the car. I locked myself out. She opened the door for me.
You have to kill Eileen Warnes because she'll kill again.
Anyone who's ever been behind bars will easily tell you that it's not really a great experience. Even crazier is the fact that everyone's grouped together, and even though prison tends to serve as a way of controlling the worst impulses in people, there are still some inmates who have stood out for being menaces even while behind bars. In this video, we'll be running through 15 of the most feared and sinister prison inmates. I'm sure that prison wardens see these guys and get the chills. Number 15. Jason Barnum. We begin our countdown with Jason Barnum. Jason might not necessarily be the most hardened criminal out there, but I think it's safe to say that he's not necessarily the type of man that anyone wants to share a prison cell with either. With his unique tattoos, one of which darkened his right eye entirely, Jason quickly got the nickname Eyeball. His tattoos depict a skull covering the right part of his face, as well as another skull printed right on his head, and then you can see a print of what looks like the thorn on Jesus Christ's head somewhere in there as well. And it all makes for a pretty weird combination of tattoo choices. But anyways, Jason was charged back in 2012 for attempted murder after shooting a police officer in Anchorage, Alaska. According to reports, police officers had been investigating a series of car thefts and home burglaries when they decided to inspect a hotel room where he was staying.
Police were actually led to this guy because at a hotel, they saw surveillance footage of a car that was reported stolen. So when they arrived on the scene, they saw more surveillance footage that showed them this guy came out of the truck. So they went into the hotel room and they discovered him with his friends, and they found a bunch of stolen items that were taken by doing 7 burglaries in the area.
After police further investigated the hotel room, Jason then suddenly opened fire from inside the bathroom. 2 of the officers shot back, hitting him in the arm, while a third officer was injured in the shootout. When he would be arrested, Barnum pled guilty to first-degree attempted murder and a third-degree felony for being in possession of a weapon. He was eventually sentenced to 22 years in jail. Number 14. Mary Mallon. Mary Mallon was, and still is, proof that you really should be careful where you eat. This American cook got the name of Typhoid Mary after it's believed that she infected between 50 and 122 people with typhoid fever back in the early 1900s. Born in Cookstown, Ireland in 1869, Mary worked as a cook in different places between 1900 and 1907. She plied her trade in different parts of New York, but it seemed like everywhere that she went, sickness always followed her around. People around her would get sick, her co-workers got sick, and it was just a simple fiasco. In late 1906, Mary was hired by the family of Walter Bowen on Park Avenue, and soon 2 of the household servants had to be taken to the hospital, and a member of the Bowen family also contracted typhoid and then died. After several incidents, it was eventually discovered that Mary had indeed been the cause of these illnesses. She was eventually sent to quarantine twice, although she pled that she didn't know that she carried the disease. All in all, Mary had contaminated between 50 and 122 people, with 5 people losing their lives because of it. It was even more weird that in a diary entry found decades after her death, she would reveal that she had known about her diagnosis the entire. Detectives managed to get DNA samples from Joseph's victims, and they ran the samples through a genealogy website. Surely enough, Big Joe would be eventually found. Joseph was eventually sentenced to life in prison in August of 2020 and will continue to spend the rest of his miserable life behind bars. Bronson. Charles Bronson is currently one of the UK's longest-serving inmates. When Charles was initially arrested decades ago, he would be jailed for robbery and wounding. So, sure, he did something wrong, but time has moved on and we're now 50 years away from that incident, so why is he still locked up? Well, it's because Charles has never stayed out of trouble while behind bars. In 1975, he attacked a fellow inmate with a glass jug. In 1985, he would stage a rooftop protest that lasted 3 days. In 1994, he held a prison librarian hostage, asking for an inflatable doll, a helicopter, and a cup of tea in exchange. 4 years later, he would hold 3 inmates hostage while in a London prison.
Bronson's serving a life sentence for taking a prison art teacher hostage in 1999. Though he didn't hurt him physically, his victim still suffers mentally from the trauma.
Another 2-year jail term would be given to him in 2014 after he held his prison governor in a headlock. I mean, the guy is just wacko. Wherever Charles goes, trouble follows behind him. Things would get so bad that prisons didn't even want him. A 9-year-old girl that he tried to rape and ended up slashing with a knife. He managed to escape the law after his wife provided an alibi, but that would only be the beginning. Andre's next victim came in 1981, where he raped a 17-year-old girl, eventually killing her, and from then on, it was one victim after another. Andre's spree was insane. He killed both young men and women, and in some instances, he even ate the sexual organs of his victims, or just removed their body parts for fun. By 1984, a further 14 victims had been added to his cache. He was bathing and attacking his mother for scolding him. Tsutomu's real madness happened between August of 1988 and June of 1989, when he murdered and mutilated 4 young girls, all between the ages of 4 and 7. He reportedly molested their corpses and even drank the blood of one of his victims. The crimes were truly shocking, especially within the region, which had seen very few crimes against children. He was eventually arrested in July of 1989 after being caught by his would-be fifth victim's father. While searching his room, police would find over 5,000 videotapes with recordings of his victims interspersed between anime and slasher films. So after that, it's safe to say that he was done. His trial would last for well over a decade, and he seemed very unmoved by what he had done, even going as far as calling the murders an act of benevolence. He was eventually hanged in 2008, ending a life that was truly weirdly lived. Number 4. Jack Unterweger. Normally, prisoners should be given second chances if they show remorse or change. But in the case of Jack Unterweger, I think it's safe to say that the system actually got this one wrong. Born Johann Unterweger, Jack's mother had been jailed for fraud when he was very young. He eventually went to live with his grandfather, who then involved him in several petty crimes from an early age. For much of his youth, Jack went in and out of jails. He would be convicted 16 times, mostly for things like petty theft and pimping. Jack's first murder would come in 1974 when he killed an 18-year-old girl by strangling her with her bra.
According to testimony by Barbara, the pair picked her up after robbing Margaret's parents' house and drove her to an isolated location. When she refused to have sex with him, he struck her in the head and strangled her to death with the strap of her own bra, abandoning her body in the woods. Jack confessed to seeing his mother's face in Margaret's and said he simply snapped.
He was eventually tried and sentenced to life in prison in 1976, and while there, he began writing poems and short stories. Jack's literary prowess would gain him a lot of fans, so much so that they began a campaign to get him freed. He was eventually let go in 1990 after fulfilling the mandatory 15-year minimum sentence, and once he was free, it was back to his old habits as the underwear strangler. Jack killed 8 women in 1990, strangling them all with their bras. He was hired by an Austrian magazine to write crime stories in the United States, and he came to California, where he then killed 3 more sex workers. Following a 2-year investigation and manhunt, Jack would eventually be arrested in February of 1992 and then extradited to Austria. He was diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder and eventually sentenced to life without parole. But shortly after sentencing, he would die in prison. Number 3. Rodney Alcala. Rodney Alcala, or the game show contestant as he would be called, was not just 1990. 7 men within a year? there's anything that some of these guys have shown, it's that sometimes the worst of the worst do get what they deserve. I'm pretty sure there are several more terrible people in prison, so let me know in the comments down below if I missed anyone.